Hey gang, it's Will from Tested. I'm at America's Test Kitchen today, and Andrea Geary, who's one of the cooks in the test kitchen, is going to teach me about baked Alaska.
Yes, classically it has a cake base, and then there's ice cream, and then there's meringue, and then you put it in the oven, and you let the outside get really hot, and the inside stays really cold.
So you have like a combination of sensations in your mouth when you combine the bites. Is the theory?
Ideally, if it all goes well and it doesn't all melt, yes.
And this is a dish that was really popular at some period of time in the not too distant past in America, right?
It was. I mean, it is associated with like the 50s and 60s and 70s, but it was. It really became popular when Alaska became a state.
Oh, that makes sense.
And so the recipe actually predates that, but that's when they started calling it an Alaska. And it's sort of neat because it was first called an Alaska Florida because it combined the both extreme climates of the U.S.
The hot and the cold. Okay,
yeah.
so we have a test here today. And can you explain the setup for the two different things that we're going to try?
So this is very early on. So this is not the most formal kind of test. There are a lot of variables here. Usually I try to limit it to one variable. The variable that we're going to pay attention to is the texture of the meringue.
Okay.
This is what they call a Swiss meringue, and this is what they call an Italian meringue. In a Swiss meringue, you cook your egg whites and sugar together over a water bath until they're very hot. And then you transfer that to a mixer and you whip it until it's sort of like marshmallow fluff.
Okay.
With an Italian meringue, you start your egg whites whipping until they're foamy while you bring your sugar to a simmer on the stove. And actually you bring it up to 240, which is the softball stage. Okay. And then with the mixer going, you pour that hot syrup in. And then you whip it until it's cool.
So then, does that result in different consistency at the end too, traditionally?
They looked quite similar to me, and I tasted both of them, and they tasted similar. Interestingly, one had a slightly greater volume than the other, and I'm interested to see if that affects how it insulates, and I'm also interested to see if that affects how it eats.
Fantastic. So this will go in the oven for a few minutes, and we'll take it out, and I think you have some more stuff.
Yeah, so another thing I'm testing here is this one I'm going to bake in the oven until it's fully browned. This one I'm going to pull out early. This is something I read in Mastering the Art of French Cooking, where she puts an empty eggshell in the top, and when it comes out, she pours flaming liqueur into that and all around, and we'll turn off the lights, and I hope it's quite spectacular.
So it should be a spectacle.
I hope so.
Literally a spectacular dinner.
I hope so.
Okay, I can't wait to light this on fire, but first we have to put it in the oven for a little bit, right?
We do, yep, for about 4 minutes.
Should I grab the other one, Andrea?
Sure, that'd be great.
So we have about 4 minutes. When you guys are developing recipes, I look around and I see literally dozens of ovens kind of everywhere I look. I assume that when you're developing this, if you're doing how many iterations?
Well, sometimes they do. We always start with a 5-recipe test. So last Friday I had to have 5 of them come out of the oven simultaneously.
Oh, wow.
Which is a little bit of actually this wasn't so bad because I found that you could put the meringue on ahead of time and just pop them back in the freezer for a bit. So it was pretty forgiving. If you have to do a 5-recipe test for a stir fry or something, that's a challenge.
So a lot of people cooking simultaneously, I assume?
Well, it's usually just one person and maybe an assistant. So sometimes, sometimes it can get a little hairy.
So you use the initial 5-recipe test and then kind of use that to hone in and decide where you're going to focus on different areas of the recipe?
Yeah, we choose 5 recipes. We get loads of recipes, dozens of recipes. And then we choose 5 that have different techniques, unusual ingredients, or maybe that are from particularly notable authors, things like that. And then we'll test them all. People will fill out a tasting sheet saying what they liked, what they didn't like, and then we'll sort of cobble together a working recipe. And then we will just test the heck out of it and test every single variable. And we test the accepted wisdom. People always make meringue the same way, but what if you do it a different way? Do you really have to add the sugar gradually, or can you add it all at the beginning? Or
sear your meat to keep the juices in.
Exactly, and that's how we've come up with some of our most surprising discoveries. Is just to really, you have to question everything.
I mean, it's really fascinating when you're drilling down into a recipe. How often do you find that you've hit kind of a dead end and have to pull back out and then go down another path?
Well, I mean, some are really, really smooth, and others. I was developing a recipe for a soft-boiled egg, and I became obsessed with the idea that the yolk had to be perfectly centered. And so I spent at least 2 weeks centering the egg yolks and
like spinning them?
No, actually, I shook them
Okay.
I shook them because they have that membrane that connects them top to bottom, but as they age, that membrane tightens up. So if you just dislodge them from that membrane, they'll just center themselves.
Really?
But what happened was that sac, that air sac that's usually at the broad end, was on the side, it moved, and the side couldn't accommodate the pressure when it expanded, when it got hot, and so they would explode.
Oh, wow.
So when they didn't explode, they cooked perfectly, but they did 25% of the time they exploded.
That's absolutely fascinating. Wow. Oh, those look gorgeous.
There we go.
This was my grandmother's favorite dessert,
Oh, right.
but I don't think I've ever had it before.
Okay.
So,
Well, we shall see how it goes. Okay, I'm gonna light this.
okay. There's a knack there.
I think it's gonna get a little singed over the side there. I feel like I'm back in the 60s. So I'm going to bring these out to the big kitchen,
Okay.
and I'll call all of my colleagues, and they'll come down and taste it.
Fantastic. Okay, so I'm trying the one that we didn't light on. I'm trying the one we lit on fire first. The ice cream's still really cold inside, which is nice. It's solid. The meringue is great. It's all lemony, and there's a good crunch on the outside of that one. And the almond cake is really good. So then the second one, which is the one that didn't light on fire. They're both really good, but I love the almond cake.
Yeah.
It's a much kind of heartier feel. It's just some more flavors going on.
Yeah, and
Which
I
is good.
I made the lemon ice cream, and it's a little bit icy, but I wanted to try something that would counter the sweetness of the meringue.
Oh, so this is a lemon ice cream versus vanilla in the
Yeah,
second
but
one.
this is Ben & Jerry's, which is our favorite vanilla, and
Okay.
this is a homemade lemon ice cream, which is supposed to be a lemon meringue ice cream, but I left the meringue bits out. As I say, there were sort of a lot of variables. I wanted to try out a few different things, but we're mostly trying to concentrate on the meringue. So I think what I would ultimately like to do is to decrease the amount of meringue, but it still needs to be insulated. And so the meringue always gets sort of top billing as the insulator, but the cake is also important. And if you put cake all around it, then you probably don't have to put as much meringue on there, so it won't be quite as sweet.
Well, if you have an airy cake, then the air is gonna insulate, right?
Exactly, and that's what my next test is. I'm going to try different kinds of cakes and see which is there a difference in their insulating properties. Baked Alaska is coming back, and you're seeing it in sort of more modern variations. I had one at a restaurant the other night that had a coconut macaroon on the bottom.
Really?
Which is an interesting idea, but it's very dense. It doesn't have sort of the air. Like I keep trying to think of things that are more like attic insulation.
And it's
things that
yeah.
capture air so that you get that sort of insulating property. So I wanted to try a few different things. So I have some discs of ice cream. They're all the same weight, and they are on top of different things. So I'm going to put them all in this griddle that has been heated to 400 degrees,
Okay.
and I want to see which ones melt, if there's a difference in the time that it takes them to melt. So we've got a brownie.
Okay.
This is chiffon cake. This one is a sugar cookie, and it's a little bit thinner than the others. I corrected for thickness in all the others, but the sugar cookie is a little thinner, so
Okay.
we'll give that one a little leeway. This one is a genoise, which is a classic Italian and then French cake, and then this one is pound cake.
So, I mean, I assume that the things you expect to make changes here are the amount of air in the cake or the cookie, and then probably the moisture content is going to help.
Possibly. It could be, the cellular structure of the cake, by which I mean the crumb, the air pockets. How big are they? How plentiful are they? A pound cake has very dense structure. It has very fine air pockets, whereas the genoise has a coarser structure, has bigger air pockets. I'm curious to see, the brownie this is a very dense brownie. It has like very little air in it. So I'm curious to see if that makes a difference. It will be a matter, when I come to developing the recipe, it will be a matter of taking the one that has the best physical properties, but also it has to be the one that's the most palatable. So it has to be the best combination. Because I think right now, Baked Alaska is sort of an edible science experiment, and I would like to at least elevate it to a tasty science
Something
experiment.
people are excited about, rather than like, oh, that's cool.
I mean, exactly. You want to be excited about eating it as well as sort of baking it and the experience of it.
So then when you're looking for melting, I mean, we're starting to see melting on a couple of these
We
at
are,
this point.
and this is not the most scientific test in the world because, of course, they are getting heat from the sides as well, whereas if they were baked Alaskas, they would be insulated on the outside by the meringue, but of course then we wouldn't be able to see it. But it is interesting. I mean, I am seeing, I wasn't expecting, because this, on the one hand, the brownie is very dense, so it doesn't have a lot of air protecting it, but because it's so dense, I still thought that it might not conduct heat that well, but it is actually, at this point, that's one of the losers, but the pound cake as well is it's sort of melting.
The chiffon's doing pretty well.
Chiffon's
the
doing
sugar
quite
cookie's
well.
doing surprisingly well too, despite the thinness.
And the genoise is doing pretty well, but I just don't like genoise. So I'm kind of hoping that again, that might pass the test because it does actually have a texture that's a little bit like insulation, but that also will eliminate it from the running later on, probably.
Well, and because you tune your recipes for home cooks, you can't tell them to put it in the deep freeze, put the ice cream in the deep freeze for 10 minutes to get it colder on the outside.
Right. Yeah, we have to always keep the limitations of the home kitchen. In fact, I got some advice from a professional chef, and they were talking about using the blast freezer and all that kind of thing. I was like, well, that's all nice, but it doesn't work for us, really.
I mean, people can buy a liquid nitrogen doer for a few $100s now.
Yes, true. That's true. And people are getting more and more into that kind of thing. But yeah, we'd like to keep this. People have a perception that this dessert is really hard to make, so we really want to make it as simple as we can and as unintimidating.
So then if you weren't doing this for us in front of cameras, would you wait a certain amount of time and pull the ice cream off and weigh it or
I mean, I
something
think
to
this
see?
one, well, I don't think I'll weigh it. I think, as I say, this is not the most scientific test. It's mostly just visual observation. So I would say at this point, I would pull this one off and probably this one because they are really failing.
Okay.
And then the others are still doing pretty well.
Before I did what I do now, I studied biochemistry in college, and the setup that you're using for this is almost exactly what we would use for multiple experiments at the same time.
Amazing.
I mean, we didn't use cafeteria trays. But,
I'm surprised at how well this one is doing. However, it's really hard, so I think it would be out of the running for that reason. So I think the chiffon cake and the genoise are probably the most likely candidates from this test. I have another tray that I'll do this again just to make sure it goes the same way again. But I think we'd be going with chiffon cake and genoise. Chiffon cake is a lot easier to make. And also another thing that I've found in other recipes where I've used cake in a cold application is that chiffon cake usually fares better because the fat in chiffon cake is oil, which when it's cold, it's still liquid. So the fat in a genoise is butter. There's not a lot of it, but it's rigid when it's cold. So it makes that cake, even if the cake at room temperature would be nice and soft, when it's cold, it will be hard and it will seem dry.
dense and unpleasant in your mouth.
Yeah, so the chiffon cake actually holds up a little bit better.
Well, fantastic. Thank you so much, Andrea, for
You're very
showing us
welcome.
how food testing works
You're
in the
very
test
welcome.
kitchen. We'll have more on Tested soon. Thanks for watching, guys. Bye.